You ever have one of those moments where somebody in power walks up to you, chin held high, voice dripping with that special blend of arrogance and entitlement, and tries to make you feel small over something you care about? Yeah, that happened to me. Only this time, the thing at stake wasn't just an old car or some neighborhood petty rule. It was my father's legacy. His 1969 Camaro SS shining like a sapphire in our driveway. The one thing he left behind that meant more to us than any house, any job, any trophy. And the person threatening it, Karen Whitfield, our HOA president. And as I'd soon find out, the most dangerous kind of bully one, who hides behind community standards while running her own dirty game. I was out there that morning just wiping down the Camaro's chrome like Dad taught me, polishing away the dust, thinking about those long afternoons in the garage when Karen marched right up and slammed a violation notice against my chest so hard it almost left a bruise. This eyesore is gone by Friday, or you'll face daily fines starting at $500. She stared daggers at me, then at the car, her French manicured nails tapping the paper like a threat. But here's the thing. I don't scare easy. I spent 15 years investigating insurance fraud for the state. Reading micro expressions, voice tremors, those subtle little tells that tip you off when someone's hiding more than they're saying. And right then, with Karen standing in front of me spitting out rehearsed lines about community values, I recognized every sign of a scammer about to overplay their hand. You know what I mean? The way they won't look you in the eye, the way their anger seems a little too performative. I knew what I was dealing with. This project car attracts the wrong element to our community. She sniffed her voice, getting loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Funny, she paused right before project car, like maybe what she really wanted to say was something else. I've been married to my wife Lisa for 23 years, long enough to recognize when somebody's using code words when it's not really about the car at all, but about us. Our last name, the fact that my family's a little more colorful than Karen would like for Willowbrook Estates. I looked her dead in the eye and smiled. Funny thing about those covenants, Karen, I've read every word, and that particular restriction added just 6 months ago. Curious timing, don't you think? Tommy, my son, 12 years old but old enough to know what's really happening, stood beside me, his shoulders hunched. Dad was a Purple Heart, a Vietnam vet who spent his last 6 months teaching Tommy about carburetors, about pride, about never letting anybody take what matters to you without a fight. Board voted unanimously. Karen tried voice cracking as I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the meeting minutes. Only 3 of 7 board members present. That's not a quorum, Karen, which means your new rule doesn't hold water. Her face flushed red. She stomped off barking about lawyers and deadlines, and Tommy looked up at me, that same look he had when he came home from school crying in 6th grade because some older kid called him a slur. Are we really going to lose Grandpa's car, Dad? I put my arm around him. Not a chance, kiddo. You know your old man didn't spend 15 years chasing fraudsters just to get rolled by some wannabe dictator with a clipboard. Because bullies, they count on you being too tired, too overwhelmed, too scared to fight back. But they never expect you to push back harder. After Tommy left for school, I started knocking on doors. See, one thing I learned as an investigator, there's never just one victim. Found Maria 3 blocks over, wringing her hands when I mentioned Karen's name. Her husband's been parking his plumbing truck in their driveway for years, no trouble, until suddenly Karen slapped them with a commercial vehicle, fine so high they had to sell their house and move across town, losing 15 grand in equity just to get away. Then there was Mr. and Mrs. Patel, forced to remove their garden statue of Ganesh, which had sat peacefully for over a decade after their grandson's graduation party got a little too lively for Karen's taste. Now our garden looks so empty. So American Bland Mrs. Patel said, her eyes wet. And it wasn't just them. Sarah Johnson, still in her hospital scrubs, told me how Karen went after their motorcycle, claimed it disturbed the peace. But what really bothered Karen was the fact that Sarah worked night shifts and her husband was black. The pattern was as clear as day. Families like ours, Latino, South Asian, working class, mixed, were getting squeezed out, all while Karen's real estate company conveniently enough offered quick sales for motivated sellers. You want to know how systematic targeting works? You start noticing which houses don't get those violations. The Williams family with their boat trailer in plain sight. The Hendersons' lawn equipment strewn everywhere. Every untouched house belonged to families with Anglo names, folks Karen considered the right element. The rest of us, we were just targets. It got worse. My phone buzzed, Tommy again worried. Dad, kids at school heard about the car thing. Can we really keep it? I looked at the Camaro, the violation notice, my notebook full of other families' stories. Karen had made a critical mistake. She'd picked a fight with the one guy in the neighborhood trained to expose scams like hers. That night, as I circled the community pond, I spotted Janet Morrison sitting alone clutching a manila folder like a life raft. Janet's a retired English teacher, the kind of neighbor who brings cookies when you move in. But as I sat beside her, I could see she was shaking. She'd been taking notes, keeping records of board meetings, tracking the voting irregularities, the targeting, the sudden rule changes. I feel complicit, she whispered, tears running down her cheeks. Every time I stay quiet, another family gets hurt. She'd spent 30 years teaching kids about justice, only to watch her community become the opposite. Janet, I said, what if I told you your documentation is exactly what I need to stop Karen? For the first time in weeks, I saw hope in her eyes. You think we could actually stop her? She asked. With your records and my background, I smiled. We're not just going to stop her. We're going to make sure she never does this to anyone again. The next day, I was under the Camaro's hood when a tow truck rolled into my driveway, Karen behind it, filming on her phone. Emergency removal of a safety hazard, she shouted, but the tow truck guy wouldn't touch the car after I explained the law. No court order, no tow, and I'd press charges for theft if he so much as scratched the paint. Karen turned beet red, muttering about people like you there. It was plain as day. I recorded every word. The harassment ramped up. Karen started measuring my grass, with a tape photographing our house from every angle, writing down the slope of our driveway, documenting the distance of my mailbox from the curb, stuff so petty it would be funny if it wasn't so damn calculated. Dad, the crazy lady's back, Tommy muttered one morning, peeking out the blinds as Karen crawled around our driveway with a level measuring the concrete. That's when I knew she was getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. I met my old fraud investigator partner Dave Martinez at Brewster's Cafe downtown just to get a second opinion. I laid out Karen's antics, the insurance claims, the targeting, the selective enforcement. Dave perked up. Mike, your HOA's been filing a lot of insurance claims lately. Big ones, same restoration companies every time. He pulled up some records payouts of $20.30 KA for storm damage or vandalism, most signed off by Karen. Classic shell game, Dave said. She's running a fraud ring using HOA funds. Suddenly it all clicked. Janet's boxes of records, votes, meetings, notes about which families were targeted, copies of contractor invoices, photos, timelines. It was a gold mine. Over $247,000 in fake claims over 3 years routed through shell companies that Karen owned using the HOA as her personal ATM. And every time somebody asked questions, she ran them out. Me, the Rodriguez family, the Patels, the Johnsons, all of us. That wasn't just harassment. That was a criminal operation. We set the trap, called a special HOA meeting, invited all the families, got Dave and the state insurance fraud division in the back row, brought in the local news. Karen walked in like she owned the place, folder of violations in hand, all bluster and fake confidence. I hope everyone understands that HOA meetings are for residents only, she said, scanning the room. The arrogance, right? But the moment I brought up the $247,000 in fake claims, the crowd turned. I started laying out the evidence weather data that disproved her storm damage photos of her nephew doing emergency repairs on a fence that didn't have a scratch, contracts from her own companies, and Janet's meticulous records. One by one, the targeted families stood up. Maria told how Karen drove them out. The Patels described losing their statue. Sarah explained the harassment over her job and her bike. The crowd was stunned. Then Dave stood up, badge flashing. Ladies and gentlemen, this HOA is under investigation for insurance fraud, wire fraud, and civil rights violations. Karen, for once, was speechless. And when she finally snapped, all her racism, her arrogance, her "I did this to keep this neighborhood respectable" came pouring out right into every camera and cell phone in the room. Janet Morrison made the motion to remove Karen from the board. Right then and there, it passed unanimously. 6 months later, I stood with Tommy beside my father's Camaro, the centerpiece of our community's first ever classic car show. Maria Rodriguez's family was back. The Patel's statue was in the community garden. Janet was elected president by the biggest turnout in HOA history, and the fear Karen had ruled with was gone. Even Dave came by off duty to tell me that Karen's conviction had helped expose similar fraud rings in 3 other states. But the real victory wasn't Karen going to prison. It was what our neighborhood became in her absence, a place where diversity was welcomed, where every family's story was valued, and where Tommy could show off his grandpa's handiwork with pride. My father's legacy lived on not just in chrome and steel, but in the resilience of a community that finally stood up to injustice. So let me ask you, when was the last time you stood up to a bully or watched your neighbors come together and fight for what's right? Share your stories in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from and hit subscribe. If you want more tales of standing up to HOA tyranny, because sometimes protecting what matters most isn't about rules or power, it's about having the guts to fight for justice, even when it means taking on the people who think they own you.